Welcome to Talking Meds on the PrescQIPP podcast, engaging conversations about medicines-related dilemmas. I'm your host, Jonathan Underhill. Hello, my name is Jonathan Underhill. Welcome to the latest episode of Talking Meds. You might have noticed that the introduction was slightly different, and we'll come on to why that might be later on. I'm delighted to be joined today by Ann Jacklin. Ann Jacklin is frankly a legend of the pharmacy world, as far as I'm concerned. She's been a leading UK pharmacist for a number of years, spent 31 years working in hospital pharmacy in London. I first met her in around about 1991 when I was a rotational basic grade pharmacist at Westminster Hospital. And Anne was the principal pharmacist for clinical services, I think, at Charing Cross, at the old Charing Cross Hospital, now part of the Imperial Trust. It's fair to say that Anne was always quite an intimidating presence in the hospital pharmacy world, certainly for me as a junior basic grade pharmacist trying to learn my trade, because she was so very, very good at what she did. After her career working in hospital pharmacy, she then worked on the Carter Review with Lord Carter at the Department of Health. And then after that, became a founding member and associate director of the NHS England funded National Wound Care Strategy Programme. She's also a registrant council member of the General Pharmaceutical Council and chairs the Post-Registration Practice Assurance Advisory Group at the GPhC. Anne, welcome. Was there anything I missed there in terms of your career?
I think you got the main bits. I'd just like to say hello, my name is Ann Jacklin, and I am an ex-hospital pharmacist that has worked nationally and locally, and have been practicing hospital pharmacy practicing pharmacy now for 44 years, which I think is interesting because I'm sure some people listening will not have been in existence 44 years ago. So I think it's fair to say that I'm possibly coming towards the end of my career, although watch out, I don't intend to go anywhere soon.
Brilliant. Yeah, I've had 35 years as a pharmacist, and I think the same sometimes. There's many people who I meet in my career now, early stage career pharmacists who weren't born when I was doing my pre-reg. And it's it's quite
it's when you get to be older than the young people's parents, and you'll get to be the older of the grandparents. But never mind, we're still current and very interesting people.
Absolutely. So, as I said, we changed the start of this podcast, and I said deliberately, hello, my name is Jonathan Underhill. And that's what we're going to talk about today, because Anne's recently had an experience as a patient in hospital, and she's going to tell us about her experience and why it's important that we think about things like, hello, my name is. So do you want to tell us about your experience as a patient, Anne?
Yeah, I think I'd just like to make sure that just before I do that, just and check that I'm on the right track. So Jonathan, when we've chatted recently, you've been, as you have for many years, been really a keen champion of the way that we support our colleagues, and particularly our newly qualified colleagues, to think about how the practice of pharmacy is a lot more than having technical expertise. It's about dealing with people. And if you want to make the best of your medicines, which we all do, then you need to be able to establish a relationship with people, be they public, the patient, a carer, a relative, or anybody else. If you want to deliver patient-centered care, you want to be able to do good consultation skills. And if you really want to know not what's the matter with me, but what matters to me, then you have to be able to talk to a patient and put them at ease. Okay, and I think that's the context for which we're having this conversation that follows. Have I got that right? And is there anything you'd like to add, young man?
Absolutely spot on. A theme that's been running through the Talking Meds podcast has been the importance of finding out what matters to people. All consultations start with that, or certainly that should be the first aim of your consultation, finding out what matters to the person. The question is, how do you do that? And as you say, that requires you to develop a relationship with that person relatively quickly.
Well, very quickly. It's not relatively quickly, it's quickly. You have little time. They may not want to talk to you, and so on and so forth. But let's move on from that.
Yes. So tell us about what happened to you.
So I am the happy recipient of a titanium hip replacement, which I received in June 2021, which is just a remarkable thing to have happen. You go from being in pain and not being able to walk to being pain-free and being able to look forward to the rest of your life. I had some muscular problems 18 months in. Went to see the surgeon, who said, oh, I've redone your x-ray, your hip will never dislocate, you're through the worrying time. Fast forward to June 2025, when my hip is now 4 years old. So it's had another 2.5 years of being fully embedded, and I've spent another 2.5 years rebuilding muscle. I'm at the gym, finish one class, go into a gentle stretch class, saying to myself, remember how to hold your legs. Next thing I know, I'm in pain. And I think, oh, I've gone into spasm. This is very unpleasant. Reminds me a bit of 18 months ago, but I'll just take some deep breaths in the back of a gym class, which I did. And long story short, we couldn't get out of spasm. We called the paramedics, who called more paramedics, who got me to A&E, who got me to X-ray, who diagnosed that I had indeed dislocated my hip. And as the surgeon had said, if you do that, you know about it. And I was in excruciating pain for 23 hours because I was put on, I wasn't considered urgent, and I was put first on the theatre list for the next day to have my hip be relocated under general anaesthetic. So I was tired, I was dehydrated, and I was in extreme pain. And I was also very distressed because I had no idea how I dislocated my hip. So I had fantastic paramedics who came to the gym. They were very jolly. I remember them coming in. I remember them introducing themselves. I remember them sitting down at my level. They came close to me. They felt that they could ask permission to hold my hand. They asked permission straight away. Could they look at my, whatever was my version of my NHS record? So was it my shared care record? Was it the Northwest Thames database? Because we've got a joined up health record. They asked me nicely, and I said, I'd be delighted if you took a look at my medicines database. And everything was well until they got me to A&E. And at A&E, I was in some sort of holding bit, in like a half cubicle. And I had 2 or 3 people who came to me, and I didn't know who they were. They didn't introduce themselves. They didn't say who they were. And I didn't know what they were doing. And I was in too much pain and too much distress to do very much about that. I went to X-ray, and then the X-ray person said to me, oh, the porter came, didn't introduce himself, just wheeled me along. I did explain that I was in excruciating pain, and could they take some time when they transferred me to a trolley, and they basically ignored me. And I said, no, you have to wait and let me breathe. So it was unpleasant. I was in pain. I heard an X-ray technician say, oh, looks like you've dislocated that. I was transferred to another ward, put into a bed, and had the curtains drawn around me, and I was left.
So I guess at that stage, you're in pain, probably scared, anxious, but also quite angry because of the way that people have treated you without treating you like a human being, actually, because they haven't shown compassion or cared personally about you, have they?
No, I asked, I think 6 hours into my hip dislocation, I asked for a pillow to support my leg because I couldn't put the leg down. I couldn't move it. And I was told that the pillows were in the other ward. I didn't understand how that came anywhere near to what I asked. Anyway, this went on, and I was in the end in the hospital for 3 days with a succession of people coming to see me. I definitely saw somebody from pharmacy. I don't remember very much because I was in pain. I was never asked by anybody to look at my health record. That's important because I was in hospital 3 days and I take two long-term medicines, and I couldn't get anybody to record the second medicine. How they found out about my blood pressure tablets, I've no idea. But they didn't find out about my second medicine, despite me telling people several times. So I had an incomplete record in hospital, and I could not get anybody to add my second medicine to my patient record. I was appalled and getting angry. So I go into hospital Thursday, early Thursday afternoon. Sunday morning, I was out of pain. I'd had my hip put back in, and I suddenly thought, hang on a minute, this isn't very nice. What's been happening to me? So I decided to check, is the Hello, My Name Is campaign current in the NHS? Because I was becoming myself again. I'd recovered from a lack of sleep, and I thought, hang on, I'm being really poorly treated. And I am an intimidating presence when I get a bee in my bonnet. And I realized that nobody had introduced themselves to me over 2.5 days. And I began to become very angry. So I thought, maybe I'm getting, including the nurses who had badges that said, hello, my name is, which made it even worse.
Yeah, I was just going to say, so let's explore that, shall we? So the Hello, My Name Is campaign. This comes from Dr. Kate Granger, who was a doctor in Wakefield, a geriatrician with probably excellent communication skills, because most geriatricians are really, really good at shared decision making and consultation skills, like Lucy Pollock and others. So unfortunately, Kate was diagnosed with a sarcoma when she was 29, and then had an experience where she was given some of her results from her test by a junior doctor. Let me read exactly how Kate described that. So she says, if you can put yourself in my position, I'm 29 years old. I know I've got cancer. I think it's confined to my abdomen. So I'm expecting to have an operation, maybe some chemotherapy and possibly a cure. I'm in a side room. I can hear everything that's going on outside. I'm in pain and alone. A junior doctor comes to see me to talk to me about the results of the MRI scan I'd had earlier in the week. I'd never met this doctor before. He came into my room, he sat down in the chair next to me and looked away from me. Without any warning or asking if I wanted anyone with me, he just said, your cancer has spread. He then could not leave the room quickly enough, and I was left in a deep psychological distress. I never saw him again. This is the bit that gets me, where she says, I'm a little bit psychologically scarred by that experience. So, by anyone's measure, that's an appalling way to treat a fellow human being, never mind from a junior doctor in a caring profession. So she starts a campaign up that starts with getting everyone in a clinical setting who sees a person or a patient to say and start that conversation with, hello, my name is Jonathan Underhill. I'm the pharmacist and I'm here to look after your medicines today. That sort of thing. So there was a whole campaign that came on the back of that, wasn't there, Anne? So your question to say, is there a Hello, My Name Is campaign active in this hospital, was met with...
Well, first of all, I went online to say, is it still active in the NHS? Actually, I had come across this just as part of my professional networking. I think Kate's stories were all happening after I had left Imperial, but I was doing other pharmacy-related work. And actually, it rang a bell because I was taken to being 32, being 12 hours into painful labour, when an anaesthetist walked into my room at the time and started to prepare for an epidural. And I said to this young man, "I'm sorry, I don't know who you are." And that's the very English, British way, isn't it? You know,
Yes.
British way of being polite is to say, "I'm sorry, I don't know who you are." And to my, I remember it so clearly now, this young doctor stood there and said, "That's okay." He took me seriously. "It's okay." And then I had to say, "No, it's not okay. I don't know who you are." And I think I had to say, and then I think I was left to say, "I would like you to tell me who you are, what is your role, and what is it you are planning to do." And I sort of forgotten that years and years ago. I was in this ward, and as I was getting better, I was beginning to notice that all of the staff that came in were just merely, most of them were getting on with the task. I also was brought back to being a junior pharmacist back in, 44 years ago, going to my first ward and being overwhelmed at being on my own on a ward where the patients in the beds knew what was wrong with them. They knew more about their medicines than I did. I didn't know much about the uniforms. I was so stressed by, will I know the drugs? What am I supposed to do here? What's my role? How am I going to get it right or not? That it was those days when we used to walk onto the ward, look at our feet, pick up a drug chart and say, "I'm just your pharmacist and I'm just here to look at your medicines." I then spent years with people like Jonathan training pharmacists to never say, "I'm just a pharmacist and I'm just here to look after your medicines." We know that it's very hard when you're trying to concentrate on the technical aspects of your job to remember the human contact. And the Kate Granger story really struck me because it eases every situation. I use it all the time in meetings. If you're at a big board meeting or something, you have to introduce yourself. If you start by saying, "Hello, my name is," it becomes a conversation. And people tend to smile if you say, "Hello, my name is," I have found, in all sorts of circumstances. So it really resonated with me.
Yeah, absolutely. So we said before about the importance of establishing a relationship with the person that you're looking after, and saying something like "Hello, my name is" does that, doesn't it? Immediately, because the response is going to be, "Oh, hello, nice to meet you. I'm such and such," and I think maybe you're right, Anne. Maybe we've forgotten some of those really basic tenets of communication and basic human behavior because of the way that we're in a digital world now, where we're very pithy in our responses on text messages and on social media, and we've forgotten some of those basic elements. I think I'm with the great country singer Johnny Cash here. So Johnny Cash at a concert, when he come on stage, the first thing he said was, "Hello, I'm Johnny Cash," didn't he? Maybe, yeah, he was doing this in the 1960s. He was way ahead of his time, wasn't he? But again, everyone knows who he is because you were at his concert. But he said, "Hello, I'm Johnny Cash." Brilliant.
Well, there's something about, I've been reflecting on this in life. Well, I think there's something about in life, we assume that we're polite and people focused. And that we introduce ourselves all of the time. And I've been thinking about this quite a lot because actually, if I go back to Kate and you're telling her first story, she felt traumatized and let down by it. I have to tell you, I got through my time in hospital, and there's another anecdote about trying to put this into practice. But I, 2 weeks ago, had to go and see a surgeon for a follow up. And what astounded me was when I was sitting in a clinic room with this tall, frankly, young and rather attractive, hench orthopedic surgeon, I assumed. He walked in, he hadn't quite sat himself down before he said, "And how are you feeling today?" And I went from naught to angry and just thought, "You're a stranger. I have no idea what your job is. I don't know what your name is. You've got an ID badge. I'm not going to spend my time looking at it. And I said, I don't know who you are and what you're going to do. And frankly, I don't particularly feel like telling a stranger how I feel today. Because, I wanted to be asked, why was I there? What did I want to get out of it? Not how do I feel today? And he thought, and you could see the shock on his face, and he couldn't bring himself to introduce me. He then was so shocked. I think I asked him 3 times to tell me his name, and he didn't pick up the fact that I couldn't hear what he was saying his name was. So I can't tell you today what his name was, and I can't tell you what grade he was, but I think he's an orthopedic surgeon. And then the whole consultation went downhill because he was faced with this older woman who was clearly very angry, and he had no idea why. Because my experience of being in hospital is patients' expectations are so low that they're not used to being engaged with, they're not being used to asking questions, and they close down. And then we, as professionals, expect them to open up with no softening, no human interaction. You're having a laugh.
Yeah, absolutely. So the technical skills of that orthopedic surgeon were probably phenomenal, but he's let you down because he's forgotten about the basic important, and I say basic, and maybe it's not basic, but the importance of saying, hello, my name is, and introducing yourself to somebody.
And I think this is really important, Jonathan, that this sort of thing gets dismissed by so many people, particularly professionals, because it's so basic. It's obvious. You don't need to teach me to introduce myself. I'm in my 20s, my 30s, my 40s. I've got lots of friends. People are nice to me all over the world. I know how to be polite. There's a difference between being polite, not being rude, and actually opening and engaging a relationship with the people. They're entirely different. And we very rarely in our lives need to introduce ourselves in a way that will get us quickly to things that are very important with people and for whom we have very little time. And so it doesn't come naturally, and it isn't something people do all the time.
So it's probably something that we need to teach people. So what I'm going to ask you what we do about this, but can I just sort of like say, so Simon Jacklin, no relation to Ann Jacklin, but Simon is the Director of Education at Keele School of Pharmacy, and Simon and I do some teaching together on communication skills with people doing the M-Pharm at Keele. So it's not just 30, 40-year-old experienced clinical clinicians who have this attitude, because what they say to Simon and I when we teach them the importance and we tell them the Kate Granger story and the hello, my name is, they say, why are you teaching us that? It's obvious that we're going to introduce ourselves. That's just a basic thing. And then we say, well, actually, that's not what happens. And I tell the story of people like you, Anne, where it hasn't happened, and they just don't believe it. They can't think that would be the case. So I guess the question is, what do we do about this then? How can we make this better?
I think you have to stick to your guns. I think we need to, if people want some evidence, we need to collect evidence, present it. I think we need to say to people, we do not accept the notion that we do it all the time. We need to say, this is a skill which is a key part of your practice. And I'm used to skills being taught in a practical manner. And there's something about how many hours do you have to practice a skill before you become a master at it? And there are lots of theories, aren't there, about how many times you have to do something and the habits and how many times you have to repeat them. And I believe that most people you're teaching will almost certainly never, ever have used the form of words, hello, my name is, and I am here today because, and what I'd like to talk to you about is. And even when we said it earlier, I think if I take it further now, I came into this because I want to hello my name is, because I wasn't thinking about pharmacists. I was thinking about all of the healthcare professionals. And I only saw one person from pharmacy. But what I think about for pharmacy is, if what we want to do is get into a proper conversation, then why aren't we saying, one, hello, my name is, and use the full words, because saying hello is important. Hello, saying my name is, it gives you time to do it, it sets it up. Then to say what your role is. I'm a pharmacist, I'm a pharmacy technician, I'm the cleaner, I'm the cook. And then to say something about what you want from the patient. So I'd like to talk to you about your medicines, and something about, I'd like to check that your medicines, that we've got it right for you. Not that I'm here to check your drug chart or the medicines, but I'd like to understand how happy you are with your medicines. Why aren't we actually developing the skill and the vocabulary that's not about, I'm your pharmacist or your pharmacy technician, and I'm here to check your records or their supplies or the prescribings. They don't personalize it. And that, in my view, is a technical skill. And it's not obvious. And skills need practice to get to mastery.
Absolutely right. So there's the whole thing about skills. You have to do a bit of theory. You have to understand the evidence and why it's important. You then need to watch somebody else doing it, somebody who's good at it. You then need to practice it yourself in a safe space and get feedback on that, and then do an assessment. That's how you develop a skill. And I think you're absolutely right. This is a skill that people need to learn. And it's easy to dismiss it and think, well, it's obvious, I can do this. Well, it isn't obvious. I mean, remember when the CQC used to do the inpatient survey, the annual inpatient survey every year, something like 8% of patients reported that the doctors and nurses talked about me without involving me in the conversation, which should be a never event. That should never happen. And yet it was happening for 8 people out of 100 routinely in inpatient settings. So, this is not, it's a lot better than it used to be. And we talk about this quite a lot. Shared decision making and involving people in decisions is a lot better than it used to be. But there's still some improvement to be made. And things like the Hello, My Name Is campaign can really help with that, I think.
And I think to do it, we should be thinking about, and what are the next sentences to help really people have it, because it gives you time to think. I think what we have to do is really help, particularly if you're talking about students, understand and role play the stress they're going to be under, because they've never met the patient before. They're worried that they don't know enough about the drug history. They're worried about what to do if they find something's wrong. They worry about whether I've got to be back to the dispensary or I've got to do a clinic, or what is the outcome and what I'm going to do. You're worried about a lot of things, as is right and proper, because you're focusing on that. And naturally, people look at that and don't take seriously. We also don't show them what bad looks like. So we don't role play an angry patient saying, I'm not telling you because you're a stranger, or clamming up or whatever. So I think it's really about giving people these skills. And I just what I once did, we back in the Hammersmith Hospital years ago, when we were trying to help people with interventions, we did a communication skills course. And I also had experienced this, because we said, if you want to talk to junior doctors about, basically, they've made a prescribing error. So how do you go about getting a prescription changed, building a relationship, and not pissing somebody off? So blah, 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 excuse the language. And what we did was, we started the first day saying, well, what you want to do if you want to open people is you need to ask open questions. So we'd go through what are the prefixes for open questions. And everybody was yawning, because, everybody knew that. But actually, if I asked most people today to write down the prefixes of the open questions, most people can't give me the 5 or 6. So we spent days practicing what are the open questions. Everybody ended up writing them on the top of a piece of paper to remind themselves what they were, until they got used to them. And I used to do all that all the time in appraisals. And my experience, having managed a lot of people over a lot of years, is most people can't tell you what the prefixes of prefixes of open questions are, and they believe they're asking open questions when actually they're asking closed questions, or worse, they're making a statement with a raised inflection. And I believe open questions are easier to do and understand than this, hello, my name is, and pinning out what you're here for and what you'd like from the patient. I think that's much more personally demanding.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And I think you're right about the research here. It would be really fascinating if there is a researcher out there who wants to look at the impact that this could have on patient care. I think that would be fascinating.
And I think that's the final thing I was going to add before you move on is also we've got to impress on some of the students, and it won't happen till practice. So there's also some stuff about how we think about when people are doing their foundation years or other bits of training or reflective practice, how they reflect on how all the things you're trying to juggle with an interaction with the patient, and how different it is if you're working in a clinic. You've got some time, you may only have 5 minutes. If you're trying to cover a ward where you are whizzing around and you've only got a brief question, you've got very little time, so you've got to be very compact in your introductions.
So just to finish off then, Anne, and I think we've probably covered this already, but just to summarize, what 3 things do you think pharmacy professionals can do to try and improve this area?
Every pharmacy professional could agree to start saying, hello, my name is, whenever they meet somebody they don't know. And they can then agree to help their colleague by either saying, thank you for saying that, you've reminded me that that's what I should say, or catching them if they don't. And then think about what is your next question for a patient, not a statement. So how are you going to engage your patient with a question that's targeted to what you're interested? So not how are you today, because it normally has no bearing on where you want to go and wastes time.
Completely agree. The adding to that for me would be for those people in supervisory roles, and if you're giving feedback to people, make sure you address this and think, if someone has done it, say, brilliant, you did that, that was really good. If they haven't done it, then again, with radical candor, care personally, but also challenge directly and say, you didn't actually say, hello, my name is. And that could be game changing, as it was for me when you took me on a ward round back in the 1990s, Anne, and pointed out what I wasn't doing very well, but in a very personally caring way, but also challenged me directly.
And I suppose I've got another example from my training. I had lots of people train me at different bits of my pre-reg. The one I remember, it was a lady called Susan Eccles, and I went and did drug information with Susan Eccles, and she said to me, she asked me what normal potassium and sodium levels were in a patient, because she thought it was one example of the minimum thing you should know. And she asked you every day till you could tell her, and she didn't say, it's optional, you've got lots to learn. She said, it's a minimum and I'm going to require it. This is not a democracy. This is a managed service. And the standard I want to work to is this. And just like the CQC, if your form of words are equivalent to, hello, my name is, and, then I'll accept it. But if it's just, I'm Ian, something, that's not good enough, and you are required to follow a standard. This is not optional. You learn it, you get to do it, you put it in your practice, and then you'll find, as I did on the ward when I took 2 student nurses aside and said, do you know the story? They both said no. I said, I told them about Kate, and I told them that it would really matter to me and the other patients. And I said, this is the intimidating bit, and I'd like to see you practice in this 4-bay unit while I'm here. At which they both, you can imagine, weren't looking at their shoes, they were looking at each other's shoes. The patients around me were feeling so sorry for these student nurses. I was being very kind, I was just explaining, and it takes practice. Half an hour later, one came back and said, thank you, I have remembered, we were taught it, but I haven't used it. And the other one came in to do the blood pressure, and she said, hello, my name is, and I said, I've not met that name before, where's it from? And then she did, and she said, hello, my name is, I'm a student nurse, I've come to this. She had a short conversation with the other three ladies in a way I hadn't seen before. So I believe it works. I saw it change the relationship with the other three ladies.
Absolutely, that's brilliant. Anne, thank you so much. You're clearly still very passionate about this. You're still great to talk to, and frankly, you're still quite intimidating, if I'm honest with you. Certainly for me, but in a nice way,
Actually,
and I
I'm
mean that
not.
in a nice
I'm
way,
a
and
pussycat.
it's about driving standards up. You've always been about driving
I
standards up.
believe that we do an amazing job, our pharmacists, our pharmacy professionals, our pharmacy technicians, our support staff. But I think the world gets more and more complicated than it was 44 years ago. We've got many more medicines, many more comorbidities, a really complex health system. And we've got to be supporting our staff to build their own confidence, because that will get you a long way in working with people. So I think this is about supporting our staff and our colleagues by setting standards that say, this is what good looks like, do this, and then you don't have to worry about it now. You can go on to the next thing. I think that's where I come from, is trying to help people do what they're doing as well as they can do it. It's not criticizing people, it's showing you a better way to do things.
Absolutely. Here's the standard. How can I help you? How can we work together to help you achieve that
And
standard?
how can I help you to have the insight to know that you need it? Because it's okay for you to say this is obvious, but actually we don't agree. And so if we practice it and you get it first time right all the time, you don't need to do more practice. But let's just check that, shall we?
Brilliant, Anne. Thanks very much. Thanks for listening, guys, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.